Imagine drifting off to sleep while unraveling the incredible journey of one of history's most iconic figures, Queen Elizabeth I, a ruler who redefined power, politics, and culture in the 16th century. Ready to journey through her world, from her rise to the throne to the triumphs and challenges she faced?
Ow.
Let the story of her reign guide you into the most fascinating dream you'll ever have. Fall asleep to the entire history of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I, born on September 7, 1533, was the daughter of King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Her birth was a significant moment in English history, as it marked the beginning of a turbulent period for both her family and the kingdom. Henry VIII had hoped for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty, but instead, he was given a daughter. This caused a rift between him and Anne Boleyn, leading to her eventual execution when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. Despite her mother's tragic fate, Elizabeth would grow up to become one of the most powerful and influential monarchs England has ever known. As a young girl, Elizabeth's life was filled with uncertainty. After her mother's execution, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, and her status as the heir to the throne was questioned. This left her in a precarious position, but it also provided her with the opportunity to learn the intricacies of court life and politics. Elizabeth was highly educated, receiving one of the best educations available for a royal child. She was fluent in multiple languages, including Latin, French, and Italian. And she developed a deep understanding of classical literature and philosophy. This intellectual foundation would later help her navigate the complex political landscape of her reign. Elizabeth's early years were spent under the watchful eye of her father and later, under the reign of her half-brother, King Edward VI. During Edward's short reign, Elizabeth was often kept at a distance from the court, but she used this time to hone her skills in diplomacy, politics, and rhetoric. It was also during this period that Elizabeth began to develop her sense of self-reliance and independence. She learned that survival in the court required cunning, patience, and a careful balance of power. When Elizabeth's sister, Queen Mary I, ascended to the throne in 1553, Elizabeth's position became even more dangerous. Mary, a devout Catholic, sought to restore Catholicism to England after her father's break with the Catholic Church. Elizabeth, who was Protestant, became a target of suspicion. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London for a time, though she was never formally charged with any crime. During this time, Elizabeth's reputation for intelligence and restraint grew, and she managed to navigate the delicate political and religious divisions of the time without being drawn into any conspiracies. After the death of Mary in 1558, Elizabeth was finally able to ascend to the throne. She was crowned on January 15, 1559, at the age of 25. Her early years as queen were fraught with challenges. The kingdom was divided, with many people still loyal to Catholicism. The threat of invasion from Spain loomed large, as King Philip II of Spain was eager to restore Catholicism in England. Elizabeth was also faced with internal challenges, including the rising power of the Protestant faction and the constant threat of rebellion from those who sought to overthrow her. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's early reign was marked by political savvy, a strong sense of personal belief, and an unwavering commitment to the stability of her kingdom. The moment Elizabeth I ascended to the throne on November 17, 1558, England was on the edge of political and religious turmoil. The country was deeply divided after the reign of her sister, Queen Mary I, who had attempted to restore Catholicism to the realm after the break from Rome under her father, Henry VIII. Under Mary's rule, many Protestants had been executed during the Marian persecutions, creating deep resentment among the Protestant population. When Mary died, leaving no heirs, Elizabeth was the natural choice to succeed her. But her rule would not be simple or unchallenged. At the time of her coronation, Elizabeth was a 25-year-old woman who had never married, and she was faced with a kingdom divided by religion. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been executed by her father, Henry VIII, and Elizabeth was considered illegitimate for much of her early life. Although Henry VIII had broken from the Catholic Church to marry Anne, the Pope had never acknowledged their marriage, and thus Elizabeth's legitimacy was often questioned. Even with her father's will naming her as his heir, Elizabeth's reign was not guaranteed. She had to prove her worth as a ruler, not only to her subjects but also to foreign powers, many of whom questioned her authority. Upon becoming queen, Elizabeth inherited a country in disarray. Religious tensions were at an all-time high, with England split between Catholics, who still hoped for the restoration of papal authority, and Protestants, who were firmly committed to the Reformation. Elizabeth herself was a Protestant, but she understood that her kingdom could not survive if it was torn apart by religious conflict. She inherited a country in debt, with an unstable economy, and a divided nobility that was often in competition for power. To make matters worse, Elizabeth was a woman in a male-dominated world of monarchy, and her reign was constantly under scrutiny. Her first priority was to settle the religious question. Elizabeth sought a middle ground between Catholics and Protestants, a religious settlement that would allow for religious peace in England. While affirming her Protestant beliefs, in 1559, she introduced the Elizabethan religious settlement, which became the foundation of her religious policy. 8. It was a delicate balancing act. Attempting to appease both religious factions while asserting royal authority over the Church, the settlement established the Church of England as the official state religion, with Elizabeth as its supreme governor. While it was a triumph for the Protestant cause, it also allowed for some degree of Catholic traditions to persist, providing a degree of tolerance. The settlement was not universally accepted, however. Hardline Catholics rejected Elizabeth's authority. Some even conspired to overthrow her, believing that her reign was illegitimate. Elizabeth's ability to maintain stability in the face of these challenges was a testament to her political acumen and diplomatic skills. She skillfully navigated the divided court, managed powerful factions within her government, and relied on trusted advisors, including William Cecil, who would become her chief minister. Foreign threats loomed large as well. The Catholic monarchs of Europe, most notably King Philip II of Spain, were determined to restore Catholicism in England. Philip, who had been married to Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I, was eager to put an end to what he saw as heresy in England. The threat of invasion from Spain, however, was not just religious, it was also political. Spain was the preeminent European power at the time, and a Catholic Spain under Philip II viewed Protestant England as a destabilizing force in Europe. Elizabeth's first few years on the throne were marked by tensions with Spain, particularly after she supported Protestant rebels in the Spanish-controlled Netherlands and allowed English purveyors like Sir Francis Drake to attack Spanish ships. These actions, while popular at home, were seen as provocations by Philip II. By 1585, Spain began assembling a fleet to invade England, an event that would culminate in the famous Spanish Armada of 1588. At home, Elizabeth faced internal unrest as well. The rise of the Puritan movement, which sought to purify the Church of England from any remaining Catholic influence, created a new challenge. The Puritans were dissatisfied with the Elizabethan religious settlement, believing it did not go far enough in removing Catholic elements from the Church. Their increasing influence in Parliament added pressure on Elizabeth to address their concerns, though she remained resolute in her policy of moderation. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's first years as queen saw a remarkable consolidation of power. Her ability to balance the various factions, manage religious conflict, and deal with external threats was a testament to her exceptional leadership. Throughout her early reign, Elizabeth built a reputation for being a strong, intelligent, and prudent ruler, one who could adapt to changing circumstances and navigate the treacherous waters of court, politics, and international diplomacy. As England stood on the brink of war with Spain, Elizabeth's steady hand would be put to the ultimate test. In 1588, one of the most defining moments of Elizabeth I's reign occurred: the defeat of the Spanish Armada. This event not only cemented her status as one of England's most formidable monarchs, but also marked a significant turning point in European history. The threat of invasion by Catholic Spain, led by King Philip II, loomed large for much of Elizabeth's reign. Spain, the most powerful nation in the world at the time, sought to end English Protestantism and restore Catholicism to the island. Elizabeth, determined to protect her kingdom and her people, would face one of the greatest military challenges of her reign. The roots of the conflict lay in a combination of religious, political, and economic factors. Philip II, who had once been married to Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I, viewed Elizabeth's Protestant rule as an affront to Catholicism. Spain had long been a dominant force in Europe, with a vast empire stretching across the Americas and parts of Europe. When Elizabeth supported the Protestant Dutch rebels against Spanish rule in the Netherlands and gave sanctuary to English privateers who raided Spanish ships, Philip saw it as an open challenge to his authority. The tension escalated when Elizabeth authorized the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587. Mary was the Catholic heir to the English throne, and her death was seen by Philip II as the final straw. He used it as a pretext to assemble a massive invasion fleet, what would come to be known as the Spanish Armada. The Armada was composed of 130 ships, including battleships, transport vessels, and supply ships, and it carried about 30,000 men, including soldiers, sailors, and priests, all ready to invade England and overthrow Elizabeth. Philip's plan was to sail the Armada up the English Channel, land in England, and join forces with Catholic sympathizers within the country, particularly those in the north who were hostile to Elizabeth's Protestant rule. Once in England, the Spanish hoped to capture Elizabeth and restore Catholicism. The Armada's superiority in numbers and firepower seemed insurmountable, and many believed that it was only a matter of time before England would fall to Spain. But Elizabeth, despite the odds, did not falter. She had already proved herself as a shrewd and capable monarch, and she would show that her leadership in times of crisis was unmatched. As the Spanish Armada began its approach, Elizabeth called upon her navy, commanded by men like Sir Francis Drake and Lord Howard of Effingham, to prepare for battle. The English navy was smaller, with only about 200 ships, but it was faster, more maneuverable, and more suited to the type of warfare that would unfold. On July 29, 1588, the Armada arrived off the coast of England, ready to engage in battle. The first major confrontation took place off the coast of Plymouth, where the English fleet harassed the Spanish, avoiding direct confrontation while inflicting damage on the Spanish ships. The English navy used its smaller, faster ships to their advantage, firing at the larger, slower Spanish galleons from a distance and then retreating before the Spanish could retaliate. The next decisive moment came on August 8th, when the Spanish were forced to anchor off Gravelines near the Flemish coast due to bad weather. The English took this opportunity to launch a bold attack. They sent fireships vessels set alight and then set adrift into the enemy fleet to scatter the Spanish ships. This tactic disrupted the Armada's carefully organized formation, causing chaos and confusion among the Spanish crews. What followed was a dramatic series of events. The Spanish attempted to regroup and sail north to the safety of the Netherlands, but the weather proved their undoing. A fierce storm, known as the Protestant wind, blew the Armada off course, and the battered fleet was forced to retreat back towards Spain. The Spanish lost many ships and men during the retreat, and by the time the Armada returned to Spain, it was a shadow of its former self. Of the 130 ships that set sail, only about half returned to Spain, and thousands of soldiers and sailors had perished in the battle and the storm. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a monumental victory for Elizabeth and England. It secured her reign and confirmed the country's independence from the influence of Catholic Spain. The victory was seen as divine providence by many Protestants, who believed that God had protected England from the forces of Catholicism. Elizabeth's status as a monarch was strengthened, and she was hailed as a hero. The victory also sent shockwaves throughout Europe, signaling the decline of Spanish power and the rise of England as a naval and imperial force. For Elizabeth, the defeat of the Armada was not just a military success, it was a defining moment of her reign. It showcased her leadership, courage, and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. It also demonstrated her ability to inspire her people, as her speeches to the troops and her support for the Navy were seen as instrumental in securing victory. The triumph over the Spanish Armada would be remembered for centuries and would serve as a symbol of England's strength and determination. In the aftermath of the Armada's defeat, Elizabeth's reign entered a new phase. England's influence grew, and the country became a dominant naval power in Europe. The victory also reinforced Elizabeth's image as the Virgin Queen, a ruler who had protected her kingdom and her people. It was a victory that secured her place in history, and it would continue to shape the legacy of Elizabeth I for generations to come. The reign of Queen Elizabeth I is often remembered as a golden age, not just for England's political and military achievements, but also for its flourishing, its culture and art. The Elizabethan era, named after the Queen, saw the birth of some of the greatest works of English literature, theater, and art. It was a time of cultural renaissance, where England, under Elizabeth's rule, began to emerge as a major player on the world stage. This period saw the rise of some of the most famous names in English history, including William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Sir Francis Drake. At the heart of this cultural boom was the English Renaissance, which brought with it a renewed interest in the classical arts, literature, and learning. Elizabeth was an avid patron of the arts and believed in the power of culture to reflect the greatness of her reign. Her court became a center of intellectual and artistic activity, attracting scholars, poets, musicians, and artists from all over Europe. It was also during this time that England's first major works of theater were written and performed. One of the most important figures of the Elizabethan cultural revolution was William Shakespeare, whose plays would go on to define English literature for centuries. Shakespeare wrote during the latter part of Elizabeth's reign, and his works, such as Hamlet, Macbeth, and Romeo and Juliet, explored themes of love, power, betrayal, and the human condition. His use of language, character development, and dramatic structure elevated the English language to new heights. Elizabeth was herself an admirer of the theater, and many of Shakespeare's plays were performed at court for her entertainment. The rise of Shakespeare in the theater was part of a broader cultural movement that celebrated individual expression, creativity, and human potential. Christopher Marlowe, another key figure in Elizabethan theater, was instrumental in the development of English drama. Marlowe's works, including Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine the Great, pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in Elizabethan drama. His exploration of complex characters, philosophical themes, tragic narratives paved the way for Shakespeare's later works. The success of these playwrights also contributed to the development of the Globe Theatre and other famous playhouses in London, where their works were performed for audiences eager for entertainment and cultural enrichment. In addition to literature and theater, the Elizabethan era also saw a significant rise in visual arts. The Queen herself was a patron of painters and artists, commissioning portraits that reflected her regal status and powerful image. Elizabeth's portraits were carefully crafted to present her as both a symbol of political authority and divine protection. Artists like Nicholas Hilliard and George Gower painted iconic images of the Queen, which would later become symbols of the period. These portraits were not just representations of the Queen, they were also expressions of the power, grandeur, and stability she provided to her kingdom. Music also flourished during the Elizabethan era. The rise of composers like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis saw the creation of beautiful choral music, much of it written for use in the Anglican Church. Elizabeth's reign was a time of significant change in English religious music, as the Church of England solidified its identity. The music produced during this period was reflective of the harmony Elizabeth sought to create between different religious and cultural factions in her kingdom. The sound of English madrigals, masses, and anthems would echo through the churches and courts, providing a soundtrack to the grandeur of the era. While culture and art thrived, Elizabeth's court was also known for its opulence and extravagance. The Elizabethan court was a place where noble families competed for the favor of the Queen, and their wealth and status were displayed through elaborate banquets, dances, and celebrations. Court life was an important part of Elizabethan society, and it was at court that many of the artistic achievements of the period were nurtured. Elizabeth herself was a shrewd political operator, and she knew the power of culture in shaping her public image. She used her court as a tool for maintaining control, ensuring that artists, poets, and musicians were not only entertained, but also loyal to her regime. The expansion of exploration and trade during Elizabeth's reign also contributed to the cultural richness of the era. Explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh made significant voyages to the New World, bringing back treasures, spices, and goods from distant lands. These discoveries had a profound effect on English art and culture, as the tastes and interests of the English elite broadened with new influences from the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The Elizabethan era was, in many ways, a period of great discovery, not just in the realms of geography and trade, but also in the realms of science, philosophy, and thought. The Elizabethan theater and the rise of the English Renaissance marked a cultural high point, would resonate throughout history. This was an age where art, literature, music, and exploration came together to define a golden age in England. The reign of Elizabeth I was not just a time of military victory and political stability, it was also a period that gave birth to an explosion of creativity, intellectual pursuit, and artistic achievement that would echo for generations to come. The political landscape of Elizabeth I's reign was complex, characterized by power struggles, factionalism, and the delicate art of diplomacy. Elizabeth's ability to navigate these turbulent waters, maintain her authority, and manipulate the various factions at court was one of her most impressive feats as monarch. She carefully balanced the competing interests of her advisors, courtiers, and foreign powers, ensuring that she remained the central figure in the political world of England. In many ways, Elizabeth's court was a microcosm of the challenges she faced as queen: how to wield power in a way that maintained stability, ensured loyalty, and protected her interests. One of the most significant challenges Elizabeth faced was the division of power within her own court. Though she was the supreme ruler, she surrounded herself with powerful men and women who often held their own ambitions and interests. Her closest advisor, William Cecil, later Lord Burleigh, was a key figure in her administration. Cecil was a master of political strategy and diplomacy, and his influence in court politics was undeniable. He was a staunch Protestant and an advocate for the Elizabethan religious settlement, and his advice was critical in shaping Elizabeth's foreign and domestic policy. However, Cecil was not the only powerful figure at court. Other influential men, such as Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, and Francis Walsingham, the Queen's spymaster, often clashed with each other, each vying for Elizabeth's favor and attention. The presence of these competing factions created a court full of intrigue, tension, and rivalry. Elizabeth skillfully navigated this web of personalities, playing off the ambitions of her courtiers while ensuring that no one faction could gain too much power. She was known for her ability to keep her personal feelings hidden and to remain the ultimate authority in matters of governance. But she also understood the necessity of keeping key figures in her circle loyal to her. Elizabeth's political acumen was demonstrated in her handling of the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux. At first, Essex was one of Elizabeth's favorite courtiers. His ambitions and behavior eventually led to his downfall. Elizabeth's decision to execute him in 1601 for treason was a stark reminder of the dangers of overstepping one's bounds at her court. In addition to managing court politics, Elizabeth had to deal with the delicate balancing act of foreign diplomacy. Throughout her reign, England was embroiled in conflicts with Spain, France, and other European powers. Elizabeth's diplomatic efforts were aimed at preserving England's independence while also maintaining peace in a volatile Europe. One of her most notable diplomatic successes was the Treaty of Nonsuch in 1585, which marked England's formal support for the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule. By backing the Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, Elizabeth took a firm stance against Spain, which was seen as the greatest threat to Protestantism in Europe. At the same time, Elizabeth was careful not to provoke Spain into direct war, knowing that England was not yet strong enough to face a major conflict with the Spanish Empire. Elizabeth's foreign diplomacy was also shaped by her strategic relationships with other European powers, particularly France. France, though often a rival, was also a crucial ally in maintaining a balance of power in Europe. Elizabeth's ability to maintain relative peace with France while also standing firm against Spain was a testament to her diplomatic skill. She used marriage negotiations as one of her key diplomatic tools, often using the prospect of marriage to secure alliances with European monarchs. While she never married, Elizabeth's image as the Virgin Queen was a political strategy that allowed her to maintain control over her court and the realm. Her refusal to marry ensured that she would never be bound by the political ambitions of a husband and allowed her to keep her power centralized in her own hands. Elizabeth's marriage policy was also influenced by the power dynamics in Europe. Many suitors sought her hand in marriage, including powerful figures like Philip II of Spain, Archduke Charles of Austria, and King Eric XIV of Sweden. However, Elizabeth refused to marry any of them, much to the frustration of her advisors and foreign monarchs. The question of her marriage became a point of constant speculation throughout her reign, and her refusal to marry allowed her to maintain her independence, but it also created political instability. Her single status was a constant source of intrigue, and many of her courtiers, including Robert Dudley, hoped to marry her. But Elizabeth's reluctance to take a husband ensured that she maintained ultimate control over the throne. Elizabeth's foreign policy was not without its risks, and her reign was marked by several crises with foreign powers. The most notable of these was the Spanish Armada of 1588, a failed attempt by King Philip II of Spain to invade England and restore Catholicism. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was one of Elizabeth's greatest military victories and solidified her status as a powerful leader in Europe. However, her victory was not solely the result of military prowess. It was also a product of her ability to form alliances, navigate foreign diplomacy, and maintain stability in the face of immense pressure, despite the constant political intrigue, factionalism, and foreign threats. Elizabeth's court remained largely stable throughout her reign. Her political brilliance, her ability to manipulate power structures, and her deep understanding of diplomacy allowed her to maintain control over her kingdom. Elizabeth's reign would go down in history as one of the most successful and iconic periods in English history, and much of her success can be attributed to her skillful handling of the political challenges of her time. Elizabeth I's reign left an indelible mark on England and the world. As one of the most iconic monarchs in history, her leadership not only shaped the course of English politics, culture, and religion, but also defined an era of English identity that would endure for centuries. Her legacy, built on remarkable achievements in both governance and cultural influence, continues to resonate today. It's making her one of the most enduring symbols of power, independence, and resilience in the face of adversity. One of the key aspects of Elizabeth's legacy was her ability to maintain English independence in a period of intense foreign pressure. Throughout her reign, England faced constant threats from powerful Catholic monarchs, particularly Spain, which sought to suppress Protestantism in England and restore the Catholic faith. The most significant challenge came in 1588, when King Philip II of Spain launched the famous Spanish Armada with the intent of invading England. The defeat of the Armada was not just a military triumph, but also a triumph for Elizabeth's leadership and her ability to inspire her people. The victory secured England's position as a rising power in Europe and marked the decline of Spanish dominance on the world stage. Elizabeth's success in defending her kingdom solidified her place in history as a powerful ruler who defended her nation's sovereignty with determination and strategic brilliance. Beyond military victories, Elizabeth's political acumen was another cornerstone of her legacy. She expertly navigated the complex dynamics of court politics, balancing the ambitions of her powerful advisors and courtiers while keeping control of the throne. Her diplomatic strategies, both in terms of foreign policy and domestic governance, were characterized by pragmatism and foresight. Elizabeth understood that the survival of her reign depended on maintaining a delicate balance between various factions within England and across Europe. She was adept at leveraging diplomacy to secure alliances with powerful European nations like France and the Dutch Republic, while keeping her enemies, such as Spain, at bay. This diplomatic finesse allowed England to thrive in a turbulent era. Perhaps one of Elizabeth's most remarkable qualities was her personal strength and independence. As a woman in a male-dominated world of monarchs, Elizabeth defied the traditional expectations of women in power. Her decision never to marry, thus earning the title Virgin Queen, was as much a political maneuver as it was a personal choice. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth kept her sovereignty intact, avoiding the compromises and alliances that would have come with a husband. Her refusal to marry allowed her to wield absolute control over the throne and prevent any outside influence from undermining her authority. Her image as the Virgin Queen became a powerful symbol of her independence and commitment to her kingdom. This self-reliance, both political and personal, was one of the defining aspects of her reign and contributed significantly to her enduring legacy. In addition to her political and military accomplishments, Elizabeth's reign is also celebrated for the flourishing of culture, art, and intellectual life. The Elizabethan era is widely regarded as a golden age in English history, marked by the blossoming of literature, drama, music, and the visual arts. The works of playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, who wrote during the latter part of her reign, revolutionized English theater and laid the foundation for English literature as we know it today. Elizabeth was a strong patron of the arts, and her court became a hub for artistic and intellectual innovation. The period saw the rise of English Renaissance art, music, and literature, which were deeply influenced by classical ideals and the renewed interest in humanism. Elizabeth's encouragement of the arts helped foster a cultural revolution that would define England for centuries. The religious settlement Elizabeth established also remains a significant part of her legacy. Her ability to navigate the religious divisions in England, stemming from her father Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church and the tumultuous reigns of her siblings, is a major achievement. Elizabeth's Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559 sought to find a middle ground between Catholic and Protestant factions, establishing the Church of England as a Protestant institution while allowing for certain Catholic practices to continue. This careful balancing act helped to bring relative religious peace to a kingdom deeply divided by faith. While the settlement was not universally accepted, it laid the foundation for the Anglican Church and secured Protestantism as the dominant religion in England. Elizabeth's reign also witnessed the rise of English exploration and naval power, which would later lay the groundwork for the British Empire. Adventurers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh made significant voyages to the New World, establishing English claims in the Americas and opening up new trade routes. Elizabeth's support of these explorers and privateers helped to expand England's influence overseas and paved the way for the age of exploration. England's growing naval power during Elizabeth's reign established the nation as a formidable force on the world stage, one that would continue to expand in the centuries that followed. The symbolism of Elizabeth I, both as a monarch and as an individual, is a key element of her lasting legacy. She was portrayed in portraits as a goddess-like figure, sometimes surrounded by symbols of wealth, power, and divine favor. These images were carefully crafted to project the strength, dignity, and authority of the Queen. Elizabeth understood the power of image and used it to cement her reputation as the Virgin Queen, a symbol of national unity and divine protection. Her image became iconic, and she remains one of the most recognized monarchs in history, with her portraits and likenesses being studied and admired to this day. Finally, Elizabeth's ability to leave England a stable, unified kingdom at the time of her death in 1603 is perhaps one of her most significant achievements. She died without an heir, and her passing marked the end of the Tudor dynasty. However, she left behind a strong, prosperous nation that would continue to grow under the rule of the Stuart monarchs. Her death signified the end of an era, but her legacy continued to shape England and its role in the world. Elizabeth I's reign, though fraught with challenges, was marked by a series of successes that shaped the course of history. Her legacy as a monarch who guided England through turbulent times, championed cultural and intellectual growth, preserved her nation's independence, endures as one of the most significant in English history. Elizabeth I's court was not only a place of regal authority, but also a vibrant center of political maneuvering, cultural patronage, and personal ambition. Life at court was a complex mixture of diplomacy, social rivalry, and the pursuit of power, all under the watchful eye of the Queen. It was here that the future of England was often decided, not just through official decrees and royal mandates, but also through subtle intrigues, alliances, and power plays. Elizabeth's ability to maintain control over the court, despite the personal ambitions of her courtiers and the constant pressure of foreign and domestic politics, was a testament to her political savvy and leadership. The court was a microcosm of Elizabeth's kingdom, each noble, advisor, and courtier vying for influence while maintaining a delicate balance of loyalty to the Queen. This created a highly charged environment, one where power and patronage were key to one's position. Elizabeth herself was at the center of this web of power, controlling the patronage system with remarkable skill. She understood that loyalty to her was paramount, but she also knew how to use the ambitions of her courtiers to her advantage. By rewarding those who remained loyal to her and carefully managing the competition for power, Elizabeth was able to maintain control over her court for most of her reign. One of the most prominent figures at Elizabeth's court was William Cecil, later Lord Burleigh, who served as Elizabeth's chief advisor for much of her reign. Cecil was an astute and calculating politician, and his influence over the Queen was immense. He was the mastermind behind much of Elizabeth's domestic and foreign policy, helping to steer England through the complex religious and political landscape of the time. Cecil's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics ensured his position as one of Elizabeth's most trusted advisors. However, his influence was not without competition. Elizabeth's other courtiers, such as Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, and Francis Walsingham, the Queen's spymaster, were also powerful figures at court, each with their own ambitions and agendas. Robert Dudley, who had been Elizabeth's close friend and possibly her lover, was one of the most controversial figures at court. His ambitions were high, and he sought to marry Elizabeth, though she refused. Dudley's position at court remained strong for many years, but his involvement in the suspicious death of his wife, Amy Robsart, raised questions about his integrity. Despite this scandal, Dudley remained one of Elizabeth's most trusted courtiers, and his influence at court was considerable. However, his quest for power was never fully realized, as Elizabeth's refusal to marry him ultimately kept him from achieving the power he sought. Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, was another key figure in the Queen's court. Walsingham's intelligence network was vast. He was responsible for uncovering numerous plots against Elizabeth, including the Babington plot in 1586, which sought to assassinate the Queen and place her Catholic cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, on the English throne. Walsingham's ability to root out conspiracies and gather intelligence made him one of Elizabeth's most valuable advisors. However, his relentless pursuit of security and his role in the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, created lasting tensions within Elizabeth's court. Walsingham's network of spies and informants ensured that Elizabeth's enemies were closely monitored, but it also contributed to the atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue that characterized the court. Elizabeth's court was also a place of patronage and performance, where the arts flourished under royal patronage. The Queen's love for theater, literature, and the arts helped foster the vibrant culture of the Elizabethan Renaissance. Playwrights like William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson were often commissioned to perform their works for the Queen and her court. The court itself became a center for dramatic performances, and the Queen's enjoyment of these productions only further cemented her status as a patron of the arts. Elizabeth's patronage helped create an environment where the arts could thrive, and her court became a gathering place for some of the most talented minds of the era. In addition to the artistic pursuits, the court was also a place where noble families competed for favor. The social structure of Elizabethan England was rigid, with the nobility holding much of the power and wealth in society. The Queen, however, was the ultimate arbiter of status, and her favor could make or break a noble's career. Marriages, appointments to key positions, and even the granting of land and wealth were all influenced by the Queen's favor. Court life was full of rituals and etiquette, with nobles constantly vying for Elizabeth's attention and approval. The Queen's decisions on who received patronage and titles were crucial to the success of noble families, and her court was often a place of strategic marriages and alliances. The relationship between the Queen and her courtiers was a complex one. On the surface, Elizabeth maintained a distance from her court, carefully managing the affection and loyalty of those around her. She was often described as aloof, cold, and detached, but this was part of her strategy. By keeping her emotions in check and maintaining a sense of mystery, Elizabeth was able to keep her courtiers at arm's length while still relying on them for counsel and support. Her relationship with the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley, was a particularly significant one. Though Elizabeth never married Dudley, their bond was strong, and he remained one of her closest advisors throughout her reign. However, Elizabeth's reluctance to marry him kept their relationship in the realm of courtly intrigue, and Dudley's ambitions were never fully realized. Despite the intrigue and rivalry that characterized Elizabeth's court, it was also a place of loyalty and service. Many of Elizabeth's courtiers, including Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, played key roles in expanding England's power abroad. Elizabeth's ability to maintain control over her court, manage the competing interests of her advisors, and balance the tensions between loyalty and ambition was a testament to her leadership. Her court was a place where power was constantly in flux, but Elizabeth's steady hand kept the kingdom united and her authority unquestioned. One of the most defining aspects of Elizabeth I's reign was the looming threat of Spain, particularly under the rule of King Philip II. The rise of English naval power during this period marked a significant turning point not just for England, but for Europe as a whole. The tensions between Spain and England reached their peak in the 1580s, culminating in the famous confrontation known as the Spanish Armada of 1588. However, this period also saw the rise of English privateers, the expansion of England's naval fleet, and the beginning of England's transformation into a global maritime power. The naval rivalry between Spain and England would shape the future of both nations, with England emerging as a formidable naval force that would dominate the seas for centuries to come. In the years leading up to the Armada, Spain and England had a complicated relationship. While Elizabeth I maintained a careful diplomacy with Spain early in her reign, the conflict between the two nations grew steadily more intense. Elizabeth's support for the Protestant cause in the Netherlands, her sponsorship of privateers like Sir Francis Drake, and her refusal to marry Philip II were all seen as provocations by the Spanish monarch. For Philip, the Protestant Queen Elizabeth was a threat to Catholicism, and he sought to put an end to English interference in Catholic territories. The tension between the two nations was further exacerbated by the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587, an act that deeply angered the Catholic powers of Europe, especially Spain. At the heart of the conflict was religion. Spain, under Philip II, was a stronghold of Catholicism and viewed Elizabeth's Protestant England as a heretical nation that needed to be brought back into the fold of the Catholic Church. As Philip sought to reassert Catholic authority in Europe, Elizabeth became one of the central figures in the Protestant resistance. The religious differences between the two countries were mirrored by political and economic competition, particularly as England's naval power grew and Spanish influence began to wane. Philip II's response to English aggression was to plan a full-scale invasion. In 1588, he assembled a fleet of 130 ships, known as the Spanish Armada, with the intention of invading England and restoring Catholicism. The Armada was to be the instrument of Spain's dominance, and Philip believed it would secure his control over England and ensure the triumph of Catholicism in Europe. The plan was to sail up the English Channel, land in the south of England, and march on London with the support of Catholic sympathizers within the country. Once the invasion was complete, Elizabeth would be captured and her Protestant rule would be ended. However, Elizabeth's English fleet, though smaller in number, was highly maneuverable and well-led. The Royal Navy, under the leadership of commanders like Lord Howard of Effingham and Sir Francis Drake, had been steadily growing in strength and capability. The English fleet was more agile than the heavily armed and unwieldy Spanish galleons, which relied on their superior numbers and firepower. England's naval strategy was one of speed and precision, relying on lighter, faster ships to outmaneuver the larger Spanish fleet. As the Armada approached, Elizabeth's navy used its superior maneuverability to harry the Spanish ships, launching hit-and-run attacks that damaged the Armada's fleet and morale. One of the most famous moments came when the English sent fire-ships' vessels set alight and sent adrift into the Spanish fleet. This tactic caused panic among the Spanish, who scattered to avoid the flames, breaking their formation and making them vulnerable to further attack. The battle was further complicated by bad weather, which turned the tides in favor of the English. The Spanish fleet, caught in fierce storms, was pushed further off course and forced to retreat. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a monumental victory for Elizabeth, securing England's independence and sending a powerful message to Europe that Protestant England would not be easily subdued. The defeat of the Armada was not just a military triumph, it was a turning point in the rise of English naval power. The victory marked the beginning of England's transformation into a dominant maritime nation. Elizabeth's reign saw the development of the English Navy into one of the most formidable forces in the world. The victory over Spain boosted national morale, enhanced Elizabeth's prestige, and solidified her authority both at home and abroad. It also marked the beginning of English colonial expansion, as English privateers and explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh embarked on voyages to the New World, seeking new lands, resources, and trade routes. The defeat of the Armada and the rise of England's naval power would lay the foundation for the later British Empire, which would control vast territories across the globe in the centuries to come. Elizabeth's strategic use of naval power extended beyond just military conflicts. The English Navy also played a crucial role in safeguarding England's trade routes, and ensuring the country's prosperity. As England's navy grew in strength, the nation's merchant fleet also expanded, allowing England to become a major trading power in Europe. The success of English naval expeditions, both military and commercial, helped to bolster England's economy and increase its influence on the world stage. The rise of the English Navy also had significant consequences for Spain and its empire. The defeat of the Spanish Armada marked the beginning of Spain's decline as a dominant naval power. Though Spain remained a powerful force in Europe for some time, its failure to invade England marked a shift in the balance of power. Spain's grip on its overseas territories began to loosen, while England's influence grew. The defeat of the Armada also shifted the focus of European politics from the Catholic powers to the Protestant states. With England emerging as a key player in the European Protestant cause, one of the most remarkable and often overlooked aspects of Elizabeth's reign was her mastery in intelligence and espionage. As Queen Elizabeth was constantly under threat from foreign powers, rebellious factions within her own court, and Catholic conspirators who sought to dethrone her, to maintain her position and safeguard the stability of her kingdom, Elizabeth relied heavily on Francis Walsingham, her trusted spy master, who orchestrated one of the most efficient intelligence networks in European history. Walsingham's rise to power began in the 1560s, when Elizabeth appointed him as her Secretary of State. As the Queen's chief spy master, Walsingham was tasked with protecting Elizabeth from the numerous plots that threatened her life. The most significant of these conspiracies came from Catholic factions both within England and abroad, as the Catholic Church, with the backing of Spain and France, had long viewed Elizabeth's Protestant rule as an affront to their religious authority. The papal bull of excommunication, issued in 1570 by Pope Pius V, declared Elizabeth a heretic and released her subjects from loyalty to her, opening the door for a series of plots to overthrow her. Walsingham was aware that Elizabeth's enemies would stop at nothing to place a Catholic monarch on the throne. He took swift action, creating a network of spies, informants, double agents, who infiltrated the ranks of conspirators in foreign courts. His intelligence network spanned across Europe, from the court of Mary, Queen of Scots, in France to the Spanish court. Walsingham's spies were instrumental in uncovering a series of dangerous plots, most notably the Babington Plot of 1586. The Babington Plot was one of the most significant Catholic conspiracies against Elizabeth. The plot involved a group of English Catholics, including Anthony Babington, who conspired to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the English throne. Mary, a Catholic claimant to the throne, had long been a source of tension between England and Scotland, and her imprisonment by Elizabeth had only fueled Catholic animosity toward the Queen. Babington and his co-conspirators communicated with Mary, hoping to secure her support for the assassination plot. However, Walsingham's network of spies had infiltrated the group, and he was able to intercept letters between Babington and Mary. The evidence of Mary's involvement in the plot was undeniable. Walsingham's intelligence operation exposed the conspiracy, and Mary was arrested, tried, and ultimately executed for her role in the plot. The downfall of Mary, Queen of Scots, had profound consequences, solidifying Elizabeth's rule and removing a major Catholic rival. The execution of Mary also sent a powerful message to England's enemies. Elizabeth would not hesitate to eliminate any threat to her throne, regardless of the individual's royal status. Walsingham's role in securing Elizabeth's realm was not limited to uncovering conspiracies. He also played a vital part in maintaining Elizabeth's diplomatic relationships, particularly with Protestant powers. His spies provided crucial intelligence about Spanish movements, French alliances, and the political climate in the Netherlands, all of which were vital to Elizabeth's foreign policy. His ability to gather intelligence on Spain's intentions was particularly significant during the build-up to the Spanish Armada in 1588. Walsingham's foresight and strategic intelligence allowed Elizabeth to prepare for the Spanish threat, giving her the advantage in the conflict. Espionage was not the only tool in Walsingham's arsenal. He also orchestrated an effective system of counterintelligence that was critical in identifying traitors within England. Walsingham's spies not only gathered information from foreign courts, but also infiltrated England's Catholic underground. Catholic missionaries and conspirators who were plotting to overthrow Elizabeth were often captured before they could put their plans into action. Walsingham's methods were ruthless, and his pursuit of security for the Queen often involved using brutal tactics to extract information from suspects. Despite the harsh methods employed, Walsingham's network was instrumental in protecting the Queen and ensuring the stability of her reign. Under Walsingham's leadership, Elizabeth's Secret Service became the most formidable intelligence operation in Europe. His network of spies infiltrated not only foreign courts but also the Catholic underground in England. Through covert surveillance, intercepted letters, and informants, Walsingham was able to maintain a tight grip on the political landscape of both England and Europe. His work was particularly important in preventing Catholic plots such as the Ridolfi Plot in 1571 and the Throckmorton Plot in 1583, both of which aimed to restore Catholic rule in England. In each case, Walsingham's intelligence network provided vital information that allowed Elizabeth to foil the conspiracies before they could gain momentum. While Walsingham's spy network was vital to the security of the Queen, it also created a climate of suspicion and fear at court. The existence of such a vast and invasive intelligence operation meant that no one, not even those in the highest positions of power, was beyond suspicion. Courtiers lived under the constant threat of being watched, and many would fall victim to Walsingham's network, including those who were accused of disloyalty or involvement in plots against the Queen. This created an atmosphere of tension at Elizabeth's court, where loyalty was both prized and continually tested. Walsingham's work laid the groundwork for modern intelligence services. His innovative use of spies, informants, and covert operations set the standard for espionage in Europe. His methods of gathering intelligence, both domestically and abroad, were groundbreaking and would influence future intelligence operations in England and other European countries. Even though Walsingham's network was disbanded after his death in 1590, the intelligence infrastructure he created helped protect England from numerous threats and was crucial to maintaining Elizabeth's power during her reign. In the broader scope of Elizabeth's reign, Walsingham's contributions were indispensable to the Queen's ability to rule with confidence. His network ensured the Queen's survival in a turbulent time marked by religious conflict, external threats, and internal conspiracies. Walsingham's efforts were not only about protecting Elizabeth from physical harm, but also about preserving the political stability of England. His work helped cement Elizabeth's legacy as a monarch who was able to withstand immense pressure and hold on to power in an unstable and often hostile environment. Throughout her reign, one of the most persistent questions surrounding Queen Elizabeth I was why she remained unmarried. The marriage question became a central issue of not only Elizabeth's personal life, but also the political landscape of England. Marrying a powerful foreign prince or nobleman could potentially strengthen Elizabeth's political position, but her refusal to do so had far-reaching consequences for her reign. The Queen's single status was both a source of frustration for her courtiers and a calculated political strategy that allowed her to retain control over the throne and the power it represented. From the moment Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, suitors began to approach her with marriage proposals. Among the most notable were Philip II of Spain, Archduke Charles of Austria, and King Eric XIV of Sweden. However, Elizabeth famously rejected all these proposals. Despite being young, attractive, and the queen of a powerful kingdom, Elizabeth remained adamant that she would never marry. Her refusal was not merely a matter of personal preference, but a strategic, political decision that helped shape the course of her reign and, by extension, England's place in the world. There were several key factors behind Elizabeth's reluctance to marry. The most significant of these was her desire to maintain her absolute control over England. As a monarch, Elizabeth had no intention of being subordinate to a husband or giving up her royal prerogatives. In an era when women were expected to marry and submit to the authority of their husbands, Elizabeth's refusal to marry was an assertion of her independence and power. Marriage at that time was seen as a way for a queen to secure alliances and bolster political power. However, Elizabeth saw marriage as a potential threat to her autonomy. If she married, her husband would likely gain political influence, and she would have to share her authority with him. By remaining single, Elizabeth ensured that the throne remained firmly under her control. The political implications of Elizabeth's refusal to marry were profound. In the early years of her reign, several European monarchs saw marriage to Elizabeth as a way to secure a powerful alliance with England. However, Elizabeth was careful to avoid committing to any one suitor, understanding that marriage would limit her ability to act independently. For Elizabeth, the question of marriage was not just about choosing a partner, it was about determining who would control England. She knew that by marrying, she might have to submit to the authority of a foreign monarch or nobleman, undermining her power as the ruler of England. One of the most persistent suitors for Elizabeth's hand was Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. Dudley had been Elizabeth's close companion since childhood, and their relationship was often the subject of court gossip. Many believed that Dudley was the Queen's true love, but despite their deep bond, Elizabeth refused to marry him. The situation was further complicated by the suspicious death of Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, in 1560, which led to rumors of foul play. Although there was no conclusive evidence that Dudley was involved in his wife's death, the scandal surrounding the event made it politically unwise for Elizabeth to marry him. As a result, Dudley remained at Elizabeth's court, but their personal relationship never led to marriage. Other suitors, including King Philip II of Spain, also faced rejection from the Queen. Philip's proposal to Elizabeth came after the death of her sister, Mary I, in 1558. Philip had been married to Mary, and he sought to marry Elizabeth in order to maintain strong ties between England and Spain. However, Elizabeth was not interested in becoming Philip's wife. She rejected his proposal, despite the political advantages it could have brought, and instead maintained a delicate but peaceful relationship with Spain, avoiding direct confrontation while also not committing to Philip. Marriage negotiations were often used by Elizabeth as a diplomatic tool. By entertaining marriage proposals, she was able to manipulate foreign powers into making concessions or providing support for England's policies. In some cases, Elizabeth's flirtations with marriage were designed to extract political favors. For example, she used the prospect of marriage to secure alliances with countries like France and the Netherlands. While these negotiations were never intended to lead to marriage, they allowed Elizabeth to strengthen her diplomatic position and enhance England's standing in Europe. Despite the political advantages marriage could bring, Elizabeth also understood that it could create challenges. As a woman in a male-dominated world, she knew that any marriage would subject her to the scrutiny of the people and the nobility, and would likely result in her losing some of the control she held over the English throne. Elizabeth's marriage was a decision that carried not only personal but national implications, and she remained steadfast in her belief that ruling alone was in England's best interests. In addition to the political reasons behind her refusal to marry, Elizabeth's personal experiences also influenced her decision. Having witnessed the turbulent marriages of her father, Henry VIII, who had 6 wives, and the tragic fate of her mother, Anne Boleyn, who was executed, Elizabeth was wary of marriage. The political ramifications of her father's marriages had created chaos in the English court, and Elizabeth was determined not to repeat these mistakes. Her reluctance to marry may have been fueled by her desire to avoid the complications that could arise from a union that might lead to her own downfall. Elizabeth's unmarried status became a powerful symbol of her reign. She was often portrayed as the Virgin Queen, a figure of purity and strength who would not be swayed by the pressures of marriage or the influence of a man. The image of Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen helped to consolidate her authority and contributed to the development of the cult of Elizabeth. It was a carefully constructed persona that reinforced her power and independence, both domestically and internationally. The Virgin Queen became a symbol of England's strength, and her refusal to marry was seen as a sign of her determination to remain sovereign and in control of her realm. However, Elizabeth's refusal to marry did create some challenges for her. The lack of a clear heir to the throne became a source of concern for her advisors, especially as she grew older. The question of succession loomed large over Elizabeth's reign, and her refusal to name a successor only added to the uncertainty surrounding her eventual death. Despite these concerns, Elizabeth managed to maintain control over the throne throughout her life, and her decision to remain unmarried ultimately defined her reign and helped to shape her legacy as one of the most powerful and independent monarchs in history. One of the most defining achievements of Elizabeth I's reign was the Elizabethan religious settlement, a series of laws and policies that sought to resolve the deep religious divisions within England. When Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, England was embroiled in a religious conflict that had started under her father, Henry VIII and escalated under the reigns of her siblings Mary I and Edward VI. Henry's split from the Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England had left the nation divided between Catholic and Protestant factions. Under Edward VI, the Protestant Reformation had been firmly established, but under Mary I, England was briefly restored to Catholicism. Elizabeth's task was to find a middle ground that could reconcile these religious factions and bring peace to a kingdom torn by years of religious conflict. The challenge Elizabeth faced was immense. Catholicism had deep roots in England, and many of her subjects remained loyal to the Pope, especially in the north of the country. At the same time, the Protestant Reformation had taken hold in many parts of the country, particularly in the south and east. There was also a growing Puritan movement within the Church of England that wanted further reforms to make the Church more Protestant in practice. Elizabeth's solution was to create a religious settlement that was not strictly Protestant or Catholic, but instead sought to establish a via media, or middle way, between the two. In 1559, Elizabeth introduced the Act of Supremacy, which declared Elizabeth the supreme governor of the Church of England. This act re-established the monarch's authority over the Church, reversing the policies of her sister, Mary I, who had attempted to restore papal authority. The Act of Supremacy also required all clergy and officials to take an oath of allegiance to Elizabeth as the head of the Church. The second part of the settlement was the Act of Uniformity, which sought to create religious uniformity within the country. This act mandated the use of the Book of Common Prayer in all church services and required attendance at Anglican services, with penalties for non-compliance. The Elizabethan religious settlement was controversial and faced resistance from both Catholics and more radical Protestants. Many Catholics rejected the Act of Supremacy, refusing to recognize Elizabeth as the legitimate head of the Church, and they continued to practice their faith in secret. At the same time, Puritans, who wanted the Church of England to be even more reformed, were unhappy with the settlement's retention of certain Catholic practices, such as the use of vestments and the structure of the church hierarchy. However, Elizabeth's political skill in balancing these opposing views helped to secure the settlement's survival. One of the key aspects of the Elizabethan religious settlement was Elizabeth's approach to religious tolerance. While she firmly established Protestantism as the official religion of England, she also allowed for some degree of Catholic practices to continue. For example, the Act of Uniformity allowed for the use of certain Catholic rituals and ceremonies in church services, which appeased many moderate Catholics. Elizabeth also ensured that her policies were enforced with a degree of flexibility, often turning a blind eye to some of the more extreme expressions of Catholicism. This was especially true in the early years of her reign, when she sought to avoid alienating her Catholic subjects while still maintaining Protestant control over the Church. Despite Elizabeth's efforts at religious tolerance, her reign was far from peaceful in terms of religious conflict. The Catholic Church and many Catholic monarchs in Europe viewed Elizabeth as an illegitimate ruler and a heretic. The Pope excommunicated Elizabeth in 1570, and this fueled ongoing tensions between England and Catholic powers, particularly Spain. In response, Elizabeth supported Protestant rebels in the Netherlands and Huguenots in France, further alienating Catholic monarchs. The most significant challenge came from within England itself, where the growing Catholic resistance led to several plots and conspiracies, including the Babington plot to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. The conflict with Catholicism culminated in the Spanish Armada of 1588, where King Philip II of Spain launched an invasion of England in an attempt to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholicism. Elizabeth's victory over the Spanish Armada solidified her status as a defender of Protestantism and marked a significant victory for the Protestant cause in Europe. The defeat of the Armada also brought Elizabeth's religious policies into sharper focus. As her leadership was viewed as a direct challenge to the Catholic powers of Europe, the Elizabethan religious settlement also had a lasting impact on the Church of England. The policies of Elizabeth created a distinctive form of Anglicanism, one that was rooted in Protestant theology but retained elements of Catholic tradition, such as episcopal governance. Over time, the Church of England would evolve into a more Protestant institution. But the Elizabethan settlement provided a foundation for religious stability in England for much of the period. Elizabeth's religious policies also had an impact on the development of English society. The settlement contributed to the creation of a national identity based on Protestantism. English Protestantism under Elizabeth became not only a religious affiliation but also a source of national pride and a key aspect of English identity. This was further reinforced by Elizabeth's use of religious imagery in her public speeches and portraits, where she was often depicted as a symbol of Protestant purity and divine protection. Her image as the Virgin Queen became synonymous with England. As resistance to Catholicism and its sovereignty in the face of external threats, the Elizabethan religious settlement was not without its critics, but it was undeniably one of Elizabeth's greatest political achievements. It helped bring stability to England after years of religious upheaval, and set the stage for the establishment of the Church of England as the dominant religious institution in the country. While religious tensions never fully disappeared, Elizabeth's ability to manage these tensions and establish a compromise between Catholicism and Protestantism ensured her survival on the throne and laid the foundation for the future of England. Elizabeth I's foreign policy was crucial in shaping both her reign and the future of England. Throughout her rule, she managed a delicate balance between maintaining peace and defending England's interests, while also positioning the country as a rising power in Europe. Elizabeth's foreign policy was shaped by her political pragmatism, her deep understanding of the European political landscape, and her ability to play rival powers against each other. While the Queen often sought to avoid direct military conflict, she also did not hesitate to support strategic alliances and military actions when it was in England's best interest. One of the primary challenges Elizabeth faced was the dominance of Catholic powers in Europe, particularly Spain and France. Both of these nations were deeply hostile to Elizabeth's Protestant rule and sought to undermine her authority. King Philip II of Spain in particular was a constant threat, especially as he was married to Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I, and had been a strong supporter of the Catholic cause. The tension between Elizabeth and Philip II was most pronounced when Spain, under Philip's leadership, sought to restore Catholicism in England through military force, notably through the failed invasion attempt of the Spanish Armada in 1588. However, Elizabeth's foreign policy was not solely about defense. Creating alliances that would secure England's position and enhance its influence in European affairs. One of her key diplomatic strategies was to play the rivalry between Spain and France to England's advantage. For much of Elizabeth's reign, Spain and France were engaged in ongoing conflicts, particularly over territories in the Low Countries' modern-day Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Elizabeth, knowing that neither Spain nor France could dominate Europe without jeopardizing England's interests, sought to keep both powers in check through careful diplomacy and support for one another's enemies. A prime example of Elizabeth's skill in foreign diplomacy was her involvement in the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule. Beginning in 1566, the Netherlands, largely Protestant, had rebelled against Spanish Catholic control. Elizabeth recognized that Spanish dominance in the Low Countries would pose a significant threat to England, both politically and economically, as the Netherlands were crucial to trade routes and markets. Elizabeth offered support to the Dutch rebels, known as the Sea Beggars, sending troops, supplies, and financial aid to help them in their fight against Spain. In return, the Dutch offered Elizabeth the opportunity to directly intervene, though she was careful to avoid committing England to a full-scale war with Spain. Elizabeth also forged alliances with Protestant powers in Europe, including France, which, despite being a Catholic kingdom, had Protestant factions that Elizabeth could support in exchange for diplomatic favor. Her support for the Huguenots in France helped to weaken French Catholic power, thereby preventing any one Catholic nation from dominating Europe. These alliances were also helpful in protecting England from any potential invasions by Catholic forces. While Elizabeth's policy was generally one of cautious diplomacy, there were moments when she was forced to take more direct action. One of these moments was in the Anglo-Spanish War 1585 to 1604, which was essentially a continuation of the religious conflict between Spain and England. In 1585, Elizabeth formally allied with the Protestant rebels in the Netherlands by signing the Treaty of tumultuous, which allowed English troops to fight alongside the Dutch against the Spanish. This agreement, although risky, was a strategic move that allowed Elizabeth to confront Spain directly without committing to a full-scale war. The most significant conflict between Elizabeth and Spain was the attempted invasion of England by Philip II in 1588, known as the Spanish Armada. Philip's goal was not only to overthrow Elizabeth, but also to reimpose Catholicism on England. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a major turning point in Elizabeth's foreign policy. It solidified England's position as a rising naval power and gave Elizabeth an opportunity to further assert her leadership on the European stage. The defeat also shifted the balance of power in Europe, marking the decline of Spanish dominance and the rise of England as a major naval and colonial power. Elizabeth also had to manage tensions with Ireland, where rebellion against English rule was a constant issue. The Irish rebellions, particularly the 9 Years' War, 1594-1603, or a significant drain on England's resources and military attention. Elizabeth's policies toward Ireland were harsh and often brutal, including the use of military force to suppress uprisings. The English crown viewed Ireland as a potential base for foreign enemies, particularly the Spanish, and therefore sought to maintain strict control over the island. Despite Elizabeth's efforts, however, Ireland remained a constant challenge throughout her reign, and the situation would only be resolved by her successor, James I, in the early 17th century. One of Elizabeth's most successful foreign policy achievements was her support for English exploration and overseas expansion. As European powers like Spain and Portugal were establishing vast empires in the Americas, Elizabeth encouraged English adventurers, such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh, to explore the New World and establish English colonies. Drake's successful raids against Spanish treasure ships and his circumnavigation of the globe were celebrated in England, and they helped to establish England's reputation as a formidable maritime power. Raleigh's attempts to establish colonies in the Americas, particularly the Roanoke colony in Virginia, though ultimately unsuccessful, laid the groundwork for future English colonization. Elizabeth's foreign policy was a delicate balance between defending England's interests, securing alliances, and preventing the dominance of Catholic powers in Europe. Her ability to maintain peace and avoid full-scale war for much of her reign, also taking advantage of opportunities to weaken her enemies, demonstrated her political shrewdness. In many ways, Elizabeth's reign set the stage for the later development of the British Empire, as her support for exploration, colonization, and naval expansion would have long-term consequences for England's global influence. Elizabeth's diplomatic and military efforts were integral to the rise of England as a major European and maritime power, and her legacy as a monarch who successfully navigated the complex web of European politics continues to be celebrated today. Elizabeth I's reign, which lasted for 45 years, left an indelible mark on England and the world. Known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth's legacy extends far beyond her political and military triumphs. Her reign marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, the consolidation of Protestantism in England, and the beginning of England's rise as a global power. While Elizabeth's personal life, her decision never to marry, her careful cultivation of a virgin identity, was often a subject of intrigue. Her public persona as a strong, independent ruler who defied the norms of her time continues to captivate historians, biographers, and admirers around the world. Elizabeth's symbolic role as the Virgin Queen was, in many ways, a masterstroke of political branding. Her refusal to marry and remain unmarried for the entirety of her reign allowed her to project an image of political independence and divine protection. By positioning herself as a symbol of purity and power, Elizabeth turned her personal choice into a powerful propaganda tool. This image of the Virgin Queen became deeply ingrained in the English psyche, and it reflected her deep connection to the nation's identity. The notion of Elizabeth as an eternal virgin married to her country and her people became a symbol of the unity and stability she provided during a tumultuous period of English history. The image of Elizabeth as a virgin monarch was carefully crafted through portraits, speeches, and ceremonial acts. Artists like Nicholas Hilliard and George Gower painted iconic images of the Queen, often depicting her with symbols of divine authority and strength. One of the most famous representations is the Armada portrait, where Elizabeth is shown with a map of the world and a depiction of the Spanish fleet, signifying her triumph over the Spanish Armada in 1588. These portraits emphasized Elizabeth's connection to her people, her nation, and her divine right to rule. They also reinforced her persona as the protector of England, as the monarch who was steadfast in the face of external threats and internal challenges. But Elizabeth's legacy extends beyond her symbolic role as the Virgin Queen. Politically, her reign was marked by significant achievements that laid the foundation for the future of England. Elizabeth was a skilled and pragmatic monarch who managed to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, foreign diplomacy, and religious strife. Her reign was characterized by religious stability achieved through the Elizabethan religious settlement, which established Protestantism as the state religion while allowing for some degree of tolerance for Catholic practices. This settlement ensured the survival of the Church of England and firmly planted Protestantism as the dominant faith in England, which would have a lasting impact on the country's future. Elizabeth's influence also extended to the development of the English Navy and the rise of England as a naval power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 was one of her most significant victories, not just militarily, but symbolically. The defeat of the Spanish fleet marked the decline of Spanish dominance in Europe and the rise of England as a maritime power. Elizabeth's support of exploration and colonization, particularly through figures like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh, also set the stage for England's later dominance in world trade and the expansion of the British Empire. Another key aspect of Elizabeth's legacy was her role in shaping the cultural and intellectual development of England. The Elizabethan era is often seen as a golden age in English history, particularly in the fields of literature, drama, and the arts. Elizabeth was a strong patron of the arts, and her court became a center of intellectual and artistic activity. The works of playwrights like William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson were performed for the Queen and her courtiers, and these writers, in turn, helped shape English literature for centuries. Elizabeth's reign saw the rise of English Renaissance drama, which would have a profound influence on Western culture. In addition to the arts, Elizabeth's reign also saw the flourishing of English music, with composers like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis creating some of the most beautiful choral music of the period. Elizabeth's support of the arts helped to foster an environment where creativity and intellectual exploration could thrive. And her legacy continues to be felt in the fields of literature, drama, and music. One of the most enduring aspects of Elizabeth's legacy was her ability to navigate religious tensions. Throughout her reign, she faced constant pressure from both Catholic and Protestant factions within England and abroad. The Catholic threat, embodied by Spain, and the internal religious divisions created a constant atmosphere of tension and danger. Yet Elizabeth was able to manage these tensions with remarkable skill. By crafting the Elizabethan religious settlement, she was able to create a religious middle ground that allowed for both Protestant and Catholic elements to coexist. This policy of moderation allowed her to maintain peace in England while also asserting her authority as the head of the Church of England. Elizabeth's reign also saw the establishment of a stable monarchy after the turbulent years of the previous reigns. The political stability she provided, through her mastery of diplomacy and her ability to maintain a delicate balance between competing factions at court, ensured that England would remain a strong, independent nation. This stability set the stage for the Stuart dynasty, which would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death in 1603. In the years following her death, Elizabeth was remembered not just as a monarch, but as an icon. Her legacy would continue to influence English politics, culture, and religion for centuries. Her reign marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of a new era in English history. While her successors would face different challenges, Elizabeth's reign remained a model of effective leadership and strong rule. Ultimately, Elizabeth I's legacy is one of resilience, independence, and visionary leadership. Her ability to navigate the complex political, religious, and cultural landscapes of her time ensured that England would emerge from her reign as a major European power, with a unique identity and a sense of national pride. She remains an enduring symbol of female leadership, political astuteness, and the ability to overcome adversity. The Virgin Queen became a mythic figure in history, and her influence continues to resonate, not just in the context of English history, but in the broader story of monarchs, leaders, and rulers who have shaped the world. The death of Queen Elizabeth I on March 24, 1603, marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of a new era in English history. At the time of her death, Elizabeth was 69 years old, and her reign had lasted for an impressive 45 years. Her passing left a significant void in the English monarchy, as she had been a powerful and stable presence on the throne for nearly half a century. Elizabeth's death brought with it not only the end of a remarkable reign, but also the resolution of the question that had haunted her court in England for years, the issue of succession. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth's decision never to marry and produce an heir had been a source of both political tension and uncertainty. While Elizabeth's unmarried status had allowed her to maintain absolute control over the throne, it also meant that there was no direct Tudor heir to succeed her. As Elizabeth grew older, the issue of succession became increasingly important. Many at court feared the instability that could arise from a lack of a clear successor, particularly since Elizabeth's reign had been marked by religious conflict and political intrigue. The possibility of a Catholic claim to the throne, especially through her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, had loomed large for much of her reign. The question of who would inherit the throne became a subject of intense speculation and political maneuvering. Both within England and abroad, Elizabeth was known to have carefully considered her options for a successor, but had never named an heir. Some believed that she might name James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, as her successor. Given his descent from the Tudor line through his great-grandmother, Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII, James was Protestant, which made him a more acceptable choice for England, but his claim was not without controversy, particularly among those who supported rival Catholic claimants. In her final years, Elizabeth's health began to decline. She had suffered from bouts of illness, including a severe case of smallpox in 1562. But her death was not the result of a specific illness. Some historians suggest that Elizabeth died from a combination of factors, including the physical toll of her long reign, the stress of managing an increasingly unstable court, and perhaps the emotional strain of living without a spouse or children. Her last days were spent in her palace at Richmond, where she was attended by her physicians and trusted courtiers. In the final days before her death, Elizabeth is said to have refused to take food and appeared to grow weaker. Upon her death, Elizabeth's court was thrown into a state of mourning, and her passing marked the end of the Tudor dynasty. The news of her death was met with both sorrow and relief across England and Europe. While many mourned the loss of a beloved queen, others were concerned about the future of England without a clear heir. For England, Elizabeth's death meant the end of an era of relative stability, prosperity, and religious peace that had been maintained during her reign. But it also opened the door for the Stuart dynasty to take the throne, which would bring its own set of challenges and conflicts. As for the succession, Elizabeth's decision not to name a successor in her lifetime did not leave England in a state of chaos. Elizabeth had carefully laid the groundwork for a peaceful transition of power. James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, was the natural heir to the throne. Elizabeth had privately accepted James as her successor and had given him a degree of support, though she never publicly acknowledged him as such. James, a Protestant and the great-great-grandson of Henry VII, was well positioned to take the throne, and his accession marked the beginning of the Stuart dynasty in England. James was proclaimed king immediately after Elizabeth's death, and he traveled to London to claim the throne. His reign was marked by political challenges, including issues of religious tolerance and conflict with the English Parliament. However, James I's accession to the throne was largely peaceful. He was accepted by the English nobility and the Protestant majority. His union of the English and Scottish crowns, known as the Union of the Crowns, established the idea of a united kingdom of England and Scotland under one monarch, a concept that would later be formalized under the reign of his son, Charles I. While Elizabeth's death ended the Tudor era, her legacy continued to shape the political and cultural landscape of England. The Elizabethan era had been marked by cultural renaissance, expansion of English naval power, and the consolidation of Protestantism in England. Elizabeth's reign had brought England from the brink of religious conflict to a more stable Protestant nation. Her legacy was also one of personal strength and independence, as she had defied the traditional roles of women in leadership and remained one of the most powerful monarchs in history. Elizabeth's death and the beginning of the Stuart dynasty marked a turning point in English history. Though the Stuart rulers faced challenges and conflicts, they inherited a kingdom that had been fortified by Elizabeth's leadership and her ability to navigate the complex political and religious issues of her time. Elizabeth's reign had set the stage for the eventual rise of England as a global power. With an expanding empire and the dominance of the British Navy. In the years following her death, Elizabeth was lionized as one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Her reign, often called the Elizabethan Golden Age, has been celebrated in literature, art, and drama. Writers like Shakespeare immortalized her era in their works, and her reign continues to be a subject of fascination. Her image, as the Virgin Queen, as a monarch who upheld both political and cultural power, has become one of the most enduring symbols of English monarchy. Elizabeth's reign was not only a period of political stability and cultural flourishing, but also the beginning of England's age of exploration and overseas expansion. While Spain and Portugal had dominated the seas in the New World for decades, Elizabeth recognized the importance of maritime power and the potential for England to establish itself as a global presence. Her support for explorers, privateers, the development of the English Navy, laid the groundwork for England's future empire. Under her rule, England began to stake claims in distant lands, establish trade networks, and challenge the dominance of Spain and Portugal on the world stage. One of the most famous figures of this era was Sir Francis Drake, a privateer and navigator who became a symbol of English daring and naval skill. Drake's exploits included raiding Spanish treasure ships, plundering settlements in the Caribbean, and circumnavigating the globe between 1577 and 1580. His successful circumnavigation made him the first Englishman to sail around the world and brought enormous prestige and wealth to England. Elizabeth personally knighted Drake aboard his ship, the Golden Hind, in 1581, signaling royal approval of his adventurous undertakings. Drake's actions were not just about personal gain, they also served England, this national interests, by challenging Spanish control over trade and colonies in the New World. Another prominent explorer was Sir Walter Raleigh, who played a key role in establishing England's early colonial ventures. Raleigh sponsored the failed Roanoke colony in present-day North Carolina, which was intended to establish a permanent English settlement in America. Although the colony disappeared mysteriously, its establishment marked England's serious attempt to compete with Spain and Portugal in the Americas. Raleigh's expeditions also helped increase knowledge of the geography, flora, and resources of the New World, paving the way for future English colonization efforts. Elizabeth's support for exploration was closely tied to her naval policy. She understood that a strong navy was essential to protect England's interests overseas and to challenge Spain's dominance. During her reign, the English Navy expanded in size and capability, with ships designed for both trade and warfare. Elizabeth's encouragement of privateering, wherein English sailors were authorized to attack foreign ships, especially Spanish ones, allowed England to disrupt enemy trade and generate wealth without committing the kingdom to full-scale war. These strategies not only enriched England, but also strengthened its naval power and international influence. The Queen's maritime ambitions were also motivated by economics. England's economy was heavily dependent on trade. Controlling overseas routes and colonies was a way to secure access to valuable commodities such as gold, silver, spices, and other goods. Elizabeth understood that competition with Spain was inevitable, and she cleverly encouraged exploration and privateering to weaken Spanish influence while simultaneously boosting England's wealth and resources. The profits from these ventures helped finance further naval expansion and strengthened England's economy at a time when the country had limited resources compared to Spain. Exploration under Elizabeth was also tied to national prestige. England had long been overshadowed by the powerful Catholic empires of Spain and Portugal, and successful voyages of exploration gave the nation a sense of pride and status. Navigators like Drake and Raleigh became national heroes, celebrated in poetry, music, and public ceremonies. Elizabeth skillfully used their achievements to bolster her own image as a strong and capable ruler who supported England's rise on the world stage. The Queen's patronage of exploration demonstrated her understanding of how symbolic acts of adventure and conquest could inspire national loyalty and reinforce her authority. While not all of Elizabeth's ventures were successful, her reign marked the beginning of English colonization and overseas expansion. The foundations laid during this period would be built upon by subsequent monarchs, eventually leading to the establishment of the British Empire in the 17th and 18th centuries. England's first steps into the New World, combined with the growth of its navy, created the conditions for a maritime power that could rival Spain and Portugal and eventually dominate global trade routes. Elizabeth's era also saw the emergence of a new class of English explorers and merchants. Many of these individuals, often from the gentry or merchant class, gained wealth, titles, and prestige through their voyages. Their successes demonstrated that England was capable of competing on the international stage and encouraged further exploration and colonization. Elizabeth's willingness to support these ventures, even when they were risky, revealed her foresight and understanding of the long-term benefits of expanding England's influence beyond Europe. Ultimately, Elizabeth's promotion of exploration and maritime expansion was a critical aspect of her reign. It allowed England to challenge the dominance of Catholic Spain and Portugal, secure trade routes and colonies, and establish a foundation for future empire building. The combination of naval strength, privateering, and exploration during Elizabeth's rule marked the start of England's transformation from a relatively small European kingdom into a global maritime power. Her vision, combined with the daring and skill of explorers like Drake and Raleigh, ensured that England would continue to grow in influence long after her death. One of the most significant aspects of Elizabeth I's reign was the carefully crafted image she projected as the Virgin Queen. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth and her courtiers were adept at using her image as a political and cultural tool to solidify her power, strengthen national unity, and ensure her survival in a male-dominated world. Her self-presentation was as much about the maintenance of authority and the promotion of her rule as it was about her personal identity. The cult of Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen was a strategic creation that became a cornerstone of her legacy and continued to influence English identity long after her death. From the outset of her reign, Elizabeth understood the importance of image-making. She was a woman ruling a kingdom where the expectation was for male monarchs to wield authority, and her unmarried status further set her apart from the traditional norms of monarchy, rather than attempt to conform to these gendered expectations by marrying. Elizabeth redefined what it meant to be a queen by promoting herself as a symbol of purity, strength, and divine favor. Her refusal to marry became part of her image as the Virgin Queen, an image that resonated with many of her subjects who viewed her as the embodiment of national unity and religious protection. At the core of Elizabeth's image was the idea that she was married to her country. By remaining unmarried, she avoided the complications and potential conflicts that might arise from a royal marriage, particularly the fear that an English monarch would become subservient to a foreign power through marriage. This image of a queen who was devoted solely to her people made her an enduring symbol of national strength. Her relationship with her people was portrayed as a deep and spiritual bond, one that transcended personal attachment and was rooted in the idea of divine right. The concept of Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen allowed her to take on a near-mythical status, where her virginity symbolized her purity, untainted by male influence, and her dedication to England's welfare. Elizabeth's image was reinforced through art, particularly through portraits. She was depicted as a radiant, almost otherworldly figure, often with exaggerated symbols of power. One of the most famous images is the Armada portrait, which shows Elizabeth standing triumphantly over the defeated Spanish fleet, with a globe in her hand and a crown upon her head. The portrait portrays her as a conqueror, an immortal figure whose reign was divinely ordained. The symbols surrounding her, such as the globe, the crown, and the ship, suggest that Elizabeth was the protector of the world and England's divine ruler. This was not merely a flattering portrait, but a deliberate piece of propaganda that presented Elizabeth as a queen whose power was absolute and blessed by the heavens. Another striking aspect of Elizabeth's imagery was the use of her regal attire. Her clothing was not only a reflection of her wealth, but also a way to convey power and political messages. Her elaborate dresses, often adorned with jewels and intricate designs, reinforced her image as a queen of unmatched status. One of the most famous symbols of Elizabeth's reign was the rainbow, which appeared in many of her portraits and signified her as a divine ruler, a protector sent by God. The rainbow became a symbol of England's unity under Elizabeth and of the peace and prosperity that her reign promised. Elizabeth also used speeches and public appearances to further reinforce her image. Her most famous public speech was delivered to her troops at Tilbury in 1588, just before the Spanish Armada's attempted invasion. In her speech, Elizabeth declared, "I have the heart and stomach of a king." And of a king of England, too, rejecting the idea that her gender could prevent her from leading England in battle. Her speech was a masterstroke of propaganda, positioning her as a monarch capable of leading her country to victory despite being a woman. The image of Elizabeth as a strong and fearless leader who was as capable as any king became a cornerstone of her appeal, particularly to her male subjects who would otherwise have questioned a female monarch's ability to rule. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth made strategic use of public rituals and celebrations to bolster her image. She was often seen as the figurehead of national unity. The many public festivals, parades, and royal progresses she undertook further contributed to her persona. Elizabeth's public appearances were carefully choreographed and designed to showcase her royal dignity, while also reinforcing her role as the protector of England. These celebrations also allowed her to present herself as the embodiment of the national spirit, which contributed to the cohesion of the kingdom during a period of religious and political unrest. The cult of Elizabeth also relied heavily on literary works that idealized her image. Writers, poets, and dramatists like Edmund Spenser and William Shakespeare created works that celebrated Elizabeth as a powerful, divine, and immortal ruler. Spenser's The Faerie Queen, written in the late 16th century, idealized Elizabeth as a wise and virtuous queen who embodied the qualities of chivalric heroes. Elizabeth's image in these literary works reinforced her status as the epitome of English virtue and as the nation's protector. Even Shakespeare's historical plays, though often focused on the lives of male kings, were seen as contributing to the myth of Elizabeth's reign by comparing her rule to the successes and failures of her male predecessors. Despite the romanticized and often idealized nature of the Virgin Queen myth, Elizabeth's image was not without its contradictions. While she presented herself as a powerful, divinely chosen monarch, her reign was also marked by political struggles, religious conflict, and foreign threats. The challenges she faced were significant Catholic conspiracies, the threat of invasion from Spain, and the constant need to balance the interests of powerful factions within her court. However, these challenges only served to enhance the image of Elizabeth as a monarch who was not just a figurehead, but a ruler who could withstand adversity and emerge victorious. Elizabeth's cultivated image as the Virgin Queen had far-reaching implications for both England as identity and the future of monarchy. It gave rise to a new ideal of female leadership, one that emphasized strength, wisdom, and independence. The image of Elizabeth, both as a ruler and as an iconic figure of national pride, would influence British monarchs for centuries. Even after her death, Elizabeth remained a powerful symbol of England's national identity, and her reign was celebrated as one of the golden ages of English history. As the years passed and Elizabeth I grew older, the physical and emotional toll of ruling an empire became more apparent. Her reign, which had begun with youthful vigor and ambition, was gradually marked by the strains of leadership, personal loss, and the constant pressure of managing a kingdom in the throes of religious, political, and military turmoil. Elizabeth's health became a matter of concern, both for her and for her court, as her age advanced and the demands of ruling continued to grow. Her physical condition was often the subject of speculation, and her advisors frequently worried about her ability to maintain control over the country as she approached her later years. Throughout her life, Elizabeth had suffered from various ailments, which were common for monarchs of her time due to the lack of modern medicine and the stresses of royal life. She was known to have experienced migraines, bouts of fever, and depression, particularly after the death of those close to her, such as her trusted advisor Sir William Cecil and her close confidant, Robert Dudley. Yet despite these health challenges, Elizabeth remained an extraordinarily resilient ruler, appearing in public with royal poise even when she was physically unwell. This resilience contributed to her mythic images, a monarch who could endure great personal suffering while remaining steadfast in her duties as queen. By the 1590s, Elizabeth's appearance began to show signs of aging. Her once radiant complexion grew pale, and she developed the characteristic wrinkles of old age. However, she continued to present herself as the eternal queen, refusing to let her physical decline interfere with the image she had cultivated as a powerful, immortal ruler. Elizabeth's court portraitists and artists played an instrumental role in maintaining her youthful image. Portraits of her, such as the iconic Darnley portrait, carefully depicted the Queen with a radiant complexion, emphasizing her strength and royal dignity despite her years. These portraits were not simply artistic representations, but political tools to reinforce her divine right to rule and to project an image of vitality and authority that resonated with her people. Her mental health and emotional well-being were also affected by the weight of ruling. As a monarch who had to navigate the complex web of court politics, religious strife, and international diplomacy, Elizabeth's mental strain was considerable. The loss of her closest companions and advisors, particularly her counselors and those who had served her for decades, left Elizabeth feeling more isolated. Her refusal to marry and remain childless only deepened her emotional challenges. The constant worry over succession, the looming question of who would succeed her, without a direct heir, was a source of anxiety. Elizabeth's advisors were often preoccupied with the issue of succession, yet Elizabeth herself would not name a successor, even in her final years, which only intensified the pressure on her personal and political life. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's tenacity and determination remained remarkable. Her ability to remain engaged in state affairs and maintain a strong grip on power well into her later years was a testament to her political acumen and resilience. Her public appearances remained a central aspect of her leadership. With Elizabeth often seen in royal regalia, at court events, and diplomatic meetings, the Queen understood the importance of her image in maintaining national unity and support, so she pushed herself to fulfill her royal duties even when ill. Elizabeth's work ethic and sense of responsibility to her country were paramount, and they helped her maintain a connection to her people, even as her physical body began to show the effects of aging. As Elizabeth grew older, she also faced a number of personal losses that likely contributed to her health decline. The most significant of these was the death of Robert Dudley, the man who had been one of her closest companions throughout her life. Though they never married, their relationship had been the subject of much speculation, and Dudley had long been her trusted advisor. His death in 1588, shortly after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, was a devastating blow to Elizabeth, who had relied on him for counsel and companionship. His loss, coupled with the stress of managing a kingdom constantly under threat from both internal and external enemies, took a toll on her. Her final years saw increasing signs of both physical and mental decline. She was frequently described as looking frail and weary, and her court was increasingly filled with whispers of her deteriorating health. Despite her vulnerability, Elizabeth continued to exert political control over England until her last days. She oversaw the dissolution of Parliament and managed various diplomatic and military crises, including those involving Spain and the Dutch Revolt in her final years. However, the relentless pressures of ruling began to catch up with her, and by the time of her death, her court and advisors were fully aware of the impending transition of power. Elizabeth's death marked the end of an era for England. The Tudors, who had ruled England since the reign of Henry VII in 1485, were no more. Elizabeth's passing set the stage for the Stuart dynasty and the rule of James I. Though Elizabeth had no heirs, her legacy lived on in the strong nation she had built. England had emerged as a Protestant power, a rising naval force, and a nation with a strong sense of national identity. The political, cultural, and religious landscape she had shaped continued to influence the Stuart monarchs and the future course of English history. Her health and decline were also symbolic of the closing of one of the most significant chapters in English history. The golden age of the Elizabethan era was brought to a close, but the foundations laid by Elizabeth's leadership would guide England's future. Her legacy as a monarch who managed to keep the nation stable, prosperous, and united during a period of unprecedented challenges would inspire future generations of rulers. Elizabeth's ability to continue ruling with strength and poise despite the physical and emotional toll of her reign is one of the many reasons. Her reign remains an iconic and defining period in English history. As the years passed, the final stages of Elizabeth I's reign were marked by a series of personal losses, political challenges, and health issues that began to show the toll of her lengthy reign. Despite her resilience and determination, the Queen could not escape the inevitable process of aging. The growing uncertainties regarding her succession and the future of England loomed ever larger. Elizabeth's legacy, however, remained powerful and enduring, and her reign, though fraught with challenges, marked the culmination of a transformation that had reshaped England into a global power. By the late 1590s, Elizabeth was increasingly isolated from the intense pressures of court life. She had witnessed the deaths of several close confidants, including William Cecil, the man who had served her as advisor and mentor for much of her reign. His passing left a significant void in her council. The Queen's court was increasingly filled with factionalism as new advisors vied for her attention and favor. While the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, was one of her most prominent courtiers and an initially trusted figure, his ambition and subsequent rebellion against the Queen's authority would leave a stain on the later years of her reign. Elizabeth's handling of the Essex Rebellion in 1601, when he attempted to seize power, ultimately led to his execution. Though this period of internal strife showed Elizabeth's ability to maintain control, it also marked a shift in the political dynamics at court, signaling the end of the Tudor era. Elizabeth's health was also beginning to decline in the final years of her reign. Her once vibrant appearance began to fade, and her energy was no longer what it had been in her earlier years. Elizabeth, in her 60s and 70s, began to suffer from chronic illnesses, including what seemed to be arthritis, which made movement difficult, as well as bouts of depression. The public rituals that once showcased her strength and vitality became more difficult to maintain, and Elizabeth was forced to limit her appearances. In her later years, the Queen's court was still filled with pageantry and grandeur, but the Virgin Queen's physical frailty was increasingly evident. In addition to these personal challenges, Elizabeth faced external threats in her final years, particularly from Spain, which remained a constant adversary. While the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 had secured Elizabeth's position and proved the strength of England's navy, Spain's ambitions in the Netherlands and its ongoing attempts to weaken England remained a persistent issue. Additionally, the conflict with Ireland, especially the 9 Years' War, continued to drain English resources, and it wasn't until after Elizabeth's death that the Irish rebellion was fully suppressed. Yet, despite these challenges, Elizabeth's political skill and ability to maintain the monarchy's legitimacy remained exceptional. The Queen continued to hold a central role in political decisions, and her reign was a symbol of England's growing strength and national pride. Her refusal to marry had created a legacy of female leadership that would influence future monarchs, including her successor, James I. Elizabeth's image, crafted so carefully throughout her reign, continued to represent a nation that was both powerful and resistant to foreign influence. The Queen as icon remained central to English identity. One of the most enduring issues of Elizabeth's final years was the question of succession. With no direct heir and no plans for marriage, Elizabeth's decision to remain unmarried had left England in a state of uncertainty over who would inherit the throne. While she had hinted at her desire for James VI of Scotland to succeed her, refusal to name him outright only added to the speculation. Elizabeth's unwillingness to openly name her successor likely stemmed from a desire to maintain control over her realm until her death, and to ensure that her legacy of sovereignty would not be diminished by the political ambitions of any one faction at court. In the end, Elizabeth's death did lead to a smooth transition of power. James I, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, succeeded Elizabeth and united the crowns of England and Scotland. The Stuart succession brought both challenges and opportunities to England. While Elizabeth's reign had seen the establishment of Protestantism and the growth of English naval power, her death brought an end to the Tudor legacy and the dawn of a new era of English politics. James I's accession to the throne would bring about significant changes in the governance of England, and the political stability that had characterized Elizabeth's reign would be tested during his rule. Elizabeth I passed away at the age of 69, leaving behind a unified and powerful England. She had successfully steered the country through religious turmoil, the threat of invasion, and a complex court politics. She had consolidated Protestantism as the dominant faith in England, championed English culture and literature, and maintained the political stability of her realm for more than 4 decades. Her reign was a time of cultural renaissance, military victories, and the emergence of England as a key player on the European stage. The Elizabethan age would go down in history as one of the most remarkable periods in English history. and Elizabeth I's influence would continue to echo through the centuries. The legacy of Elizabeth I is inseparable from the Elizabethan era's cultural explosion, which is often called the Golden Age of English theater. Elizabeth's reign fostered an environment in which the arts, particularly theater and literature, flourished. As a highly educated monarch with a deep love for the arts, Elizabeth played a significant role in the development of English drama, literature, and poetry, creating a lasting impact that continues to resonate in the world of the performing arts today. Through her patronage, her support of the Royal Navy, and her engagement with literary figures, Elizabeth cemented her legacy as the Virgin Queen, who not only protected her kingdom, but also nurtured the cultural and artistic soul of England. Elizabeth's era is most famously remembered for the birth of modern English drama. Thanks to the extraordinary talents of playwrights such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and Edmund Spenser, Elizabeth's patronage of theater created an environment where playwriting and performance could thrive. Her royal court and the growing popularity of public theater allowed the theater to reach a wider audience than ever before, breaking down class barriers and creating a shared cultural experience for all of England. One of the most iconic figures of this cultural transformation was William Shakespeare, whose works became the cornerstone of English drama. Shakespeare's plays, including tragedies like Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello, comedies like A Midsummer Night's Dream, and histories like Richard III are still performed today in theaters around the world. His use of language, his exploration of human nature, his ability to create multidimensional characters helped to redefine the theater as a space for both entertainment and philosophical reflection. The language innovations that Shakespeare introduced into English words and phrases like eyeball, swagger, and bedroom have left an indelible mark on the language itself. However, Shakespeare was not alone in his contributions. Christopher Marlowe, with his blank verse and tragic characters, pushed the boundaries of drama, influencing the works of Shakespeare and other playwrights. Marlowe's plays, such as Dr. Faustus, dealt with human ambition, hubris, and the limits of knowledge, themes that resonated with the intellectual and religious concerns of the time. Ben Jonson, a contemporary of Shakespeare, was also an important figure in the development of English theater. His comedies, particularly Volpone and The Alchemist, satirized the societal vices and weaknesses of the period, offering a more ruthless critique of English society. The public theaters built during Elizabeth's reign, most famously the Globe Theatre, provided a permanent space for these works to be performed. The Globe became the home of Shakespeare's acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and it was the place where many of his greatest plays were first staged. The popularity of the theater grew dramatically during Elizabeth's reign, and the Queen herself was an avid patron of the arts, attending performances at court and supporting the work of playwrights like Shakespeare. Elizabeth's engagement with the arts was an important aspect of her reign, and she saw the theater as a means to showcase English creativity, maintain the monarchy's legitimacy, and demonstrate England's cultural strength. Elizabeth's support of theater and the arts also had political implications. Throughout her reign, she understood the importance of cultural production in shaping the national identity. Theater, literature, and art helped to build a sense of shared culture and national pride. Playwrights were not just entertaining the Queen and her court, they were creating a cultural narrative that celebrated England's victories, its virtues, and its ideals. Elizabeth's own image, carefully crafted and perpetuated through paintings, portraits, and literary works, became a central part of this cultural project. Her reign saw the rise of the cult of Elizabeth, in which she was portrayed not just as a queen, but as an almost divine figure, symbolizing the unity and strength of England. Elizabeth's reign also saw the development of English poetry. The works of Edmund Spenser, Philip Sidney, and Sir Walter Raleigh helped to define the English poetic tradition. Spenser's The Faerie Queen, a long allegorical poem, celebrated the virtues of Elizabeth and the chivalric ideals of the period, presenting Elizabeth herself as the embodiment of justice and virtue. Sidney's Astrophel and Stella is one of the first major English sonnet cycles, and it helped to establish the sonnet as a prominent poetic form in English literature. These poets used the language of Elizabethan England to convey their personal and political messages, contributing to the nationalistic spirit of the time and the Queen's image. In addition to literature, the Elizabethan era was a time of innovation in music, with composers like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis composing sacred music for the Church of England. The development of the English madrigal and the proliferation of printed music allowed for the dissemination of musical works and helped to establish English music as a major influence in European courts. Elizabeth was an enthusiast of music, and she promoted the importance of the arts as a means to reinforce the stability and identity of her reign. The Elizabethan age is remembered as a time when English culture, particularly in the fields of literature, drama, and music, reached new heights. The combination of royal patronage, intellectual exchange, and the establishment of public theaters created an environment in which artistic innovation was encouraged. Shakespeare's legacy, in particular, is a testament to the extraordinary cultural output of Elizabeth's reign. The Golden Age of English theatre remains one of the most significant periods in the history of English literature and theatre, and Elizabeth's role in fostering this cultural renaissance solidified her place in history as not just a political leader, but as a patron of the arts. Its influence extended far beyond the walls of her court. The reign of Elizabeth. I not only saw a cultural and political renaissance, but also a significant shift in England's economic landscape. Elizabeth's strategic management of trade, exploration, and the development of a more complex financial system set the stage for England's rise as a global economic power. Her support for international trade, the colonization of the New World, and the expansion of English maritime trade routes allowed England to build wealth, establish colonies, and challenge the economic dominance of Catholic Spain and Portugal. These economic changes would have lasting effects, eventually leading to the emergence of capitalism and England's future imperial power. During Elizabeth's reign, England's foreign trade began to flourish. By the end of her rule, England had established itself as an emerging trading power, competing with Spain and Portugal for control of lucrative routes and markets. Elizabeth's economic policies encouraged the growth of merchant capitalism, where private merchants played a vital role in financing and organizing trade expeditions. The English merchant fleet grew significantly during her reign. Largely due to the increase in privateering, the government-backed practice of raiding enemy ships. Privateers like Sir Francis Drake brought great wealth to England by attacking Spanish treasure fleets and disrupting Spanish trade in the Caribbean and the Americas. These raids not only enriched England but also destabilized Spain's monopoly on trade with its colonies in the New World. Elizabeth's policy towards colonization was another significant factor in her economic strategy. Her support for English explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh, who attempted to establish the first English colony in the Americas, began to lay the groundwork for England's future colonial empire. Raleigh's expeditions to the New World in the 1580s, although ultimately unsuccessful, led to the English naming of Virginia. They sparked interest in English settlement across the Atlantic. The search for new land, resources, and trade routes would eventually lead to the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the first successful English colony in America. This early stage of English colonization marked the beginning of England's imperial ambitions, which would later lead to the formation of the British Empire. Elizabeth's economic policies also facilitated the growth of English banking and the financial markets. The Queen's support of the merchant class, coupled with the growing importance of investment in exploration and trade, contributed to the development of financial institutions. By allowing private merchants to organize and finance expeditions to the New World, Elizabeth helped to create a capitalist economy in which private individuals and companies played an active role in financing the expansion of trade. The growing importance of joint stock companies, which allowed investors to pool resources and share in the profits of voyages, would later play a crucial role in the establishment of English overseas colonies and the rise of the British East India Company in the early 17th century. At the same time, Elizabeth's reign was marked by significant developments in domestic trade and industry. The growing demand for wool in Europe led to the expansion of the textile industry in England, particularly in East Anglia. England's wool trade became one of its most valuable exports, and the rise of the textile industry helped to create a thriving middle class. Elizabeth's support for the wool trade and manufacturing allowed England to become an important player in the European economy, especially as the country began to export more goods abroad. However, agriculture and land management also played significant roles in the economy. As England's population grew during Elizabeth's reign, the demand for food increased, and agricultural productivity became critical. The enclosure movement, which saw large landowners enclose common land for sheep farming or private estates, contributed to the growth of the wool trade, but it also caused social unrest as peasants and small farmers were displaced from their land. While some of the changes brought by the enclosure movement boosted agricultural productivity and allowed for greater export potential, they also caused tension within English society. These social issues, combined with inflation in the later years of Elizabeth's reign, created economic hardship for many common people. A further key development during Elizabeth's reign was the growth of the English Navy and its ability to safeguard trade routes. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 not only had military and political ramifications but also secured England's position as a growing maritime power. The English Navy played a crucial role in protecting England's commercial interests, both in Europe and in the New World, ensuring the safety of English trade ships and merchant vessels. As England expanded its influence, the Navy also helped to secure the country's access to valuable overseas markets. The expansion of trade and exploration also contributed to England, as increasing involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, though this would not reach its peak until the 17th century. Elizabeth was well aware of the wealth that could be generated through the slave trade, and English merchants began to establish ties with Portuguese and Spanish traders. By the end of her reign, England had begun to compete in the international slave trade, which would become a significant part of its economic system during the following century. Elizabeth's economic legacy can also be seen in her asterisk promotion of self-sufficiency in England. The Queen sought to make England more economically independent, reducing reliance on foreign imports, particularly from Spain and the Netherlands. She encouraged the development of domestic industry, including ironworks and shipbuilding, which contributed to the growth of England's economy. Additionally, her support for agriculture and the wool trade helped to ensure that England remained an agricultural and industrial power, capable of supporting its own population and military needs. Finally, Elizabeth's reign saw the rise of a new political class, which had significant economic implications. The increasing wealth of the merchant class and the growing importance of commerce and finance helped to shape English society in new ways. These new economic forces were pivotal in the rise of capitalism in England, laying the groundwork for the country's future role in the global economy. The developments in trade, exploration, industry, and finance during Elizabeth's reign helped to shape England into a powerful economic force in the early modern world.